Let's run through day 10 in the Jonathan Majors trial. We're going to go in the order of court happenings. That way you can get the order of events and feel like you're really there in the courtroom, just as if you were a juror, and do the best we can since there are no cameras live streaming this for us. Everything I'm bringing together in this video is coming from court reporters or different articles, and I'll try to link in my own description how you can get in touch to follow them directly or check out the articles. But rather than toggle back and forth, I'm combining all of the coverage about each witness into one blurb. So let's jump in. When court first begins, prosecutors are playing jurors an audio recording of Major's 911 call on the morning of March 25th. And it's noted that it's apparent from the audio that Majors is distressed while he's on this call. And I want to highlight something else about this 911 call. Majors could be heard saying, "She's unconscious. She's my ex-partner." The first officer that takes a stand is NYPD Officer Lucero. And to sum it up in short, if you want to go with Danny's words, she says he doesn't recall much of anything at all, even with body cam footage being played back. On direct, prosecutors ask a couple questions about what it was like when he responded to the Chelsea apartment police call. He'd said that Grace Jabbari looked confused and dazed. And he also noted that she remarked to them, "How did I get here?" Lucero says that he and the other officers try to explain to Jabbari why they're there, and she says, "Is he here? Is he out there?"
And just to interject here, because I'm thinking about what we learned on Friday, so day 8. During Officer Swain's testimony, it was reported that in that body cam video, you can see Jabbari laying pin straight with her feet facing the back wall of the closet. Jonathan's in the doorway, walks in further, he's talking and gesturing. And remember, this is Officer Swain. And he said that Jabbari whispered to him saying that she didn't want him, meaning Jonathan, in the room. So it's interesting to hear this story be told here. Like, the cops just don't seem to be in agreement on what happened here.
The prosecutors play body cam footage of Jabbari on the closet floor while the police are standing around her, and they start asking Lucero more questions. In response to one of the questions, Lucero says, quote, "I noticed the middle right finger was very bruised. She was complaining about pain as well. She mentioned her ear and the back of her head." And then we move on to cross. So this is Priya Chaudhry doing this questioning here with Officer Lucero. "Do you recall what Miss Jabbari was wearing at the time?" "I do not recall." "Do you recall if she was wearing anything below her waist?" "No." "No, you can't recall," or "No, she isn't wearing anything?" He said no, as in he didn't recall. "She indicated to you that she'd taken 2 blue sleeping pills?" He said he didn't recall. Pressed on it again, he said he still didn't recall. "You asked what happened to her finger?" "Correct." And then Chaudhry asks, "You asked her why her ear hurt?" "Correct." "Did you ever look at Miss Jabbari's phone?" "No." "Based on your experience and training as a police officer, did you think Miss Jabbari had fallen?" That was objected to and sustained, and he did respond, and I don't have a note here if it was stricken from the record or not. But he said he didn't recall asking her if she had fallen. Chaudhry returns attention to the officer's body cam footage. "Did you have the opportunity to observe Mr. Majors' coat at this time?" "Yes." "What did you observe about his coat?" "I believe there was a button missing or something." And then Chaudhry starts a line of questioning about the domestic incident report that Jabbari completed at Bellevue Hospital. And remember, Majors had already been arrested at this point. So Chaudhry shows Lucero a copy of the report, and he describes that he remembers helping Jabbari write the domestic incident report. He wrote the first page, she wrote the second page, and he had accompanied her to Bellevue Hospital. Then Chaudhry asks about if he still works for the NYPD, and he says he's now working for the Suffolk County Police Department on Long Island, and has been working there for the past 3 months. And this is the last question I'm aware of on cross, and if it was the last one, I think it's a strong one. He's asked if he saw any blood or vomit in the apartment, and he says that he did not see any blood or vomit in the apartment. So then he's done testifying. Next up is NYPD Sergeant Hanson. So the jury is shown body cam footage from Major's apartment in the Chelsea apartment building. And Danny notes that the camera was notable. Like, it was positioned strangely enough that it's like looking at this, like, stuff below him isn't visible in the plane of view. So, I mean, if Jabbari's on the ground, they're probably not seeing much of anything unless he's leaning his torso down. So, I guess they must have been staring at clothes or other officers the whole time. But Sergeant Hanson is a 22-year NYPD veteran with only approximately 2 years as sergeant, and spent a month in the academy training for that promotion. And what could make that significant is it's because he's the ultimate decision maker when it comes to an arrest. Sergeant Hanson explains that he was first, quote, checking the nightstand for any pill bottles or remnants of pills. And that the reasoning for that was because the initial 911 call we got was that a female had overdosed and attempted to unalive themselves. Now, to emphasize here, the wording of this next part differs between reporters, and I'm not sure if it was two separate questions or one. So we have, on one hand, he says he didn't see any evidence, and then on the other, we have that he said he didn't do any evidence collection. Now, one could follow the other, right? If you don't see any evidence, you probably aren't going to do any evidence collection. But just stating, I don't have full clarity there. Sergeant Hanson goes on to say, when I turned to look at the nightstand, I noticed there was a small amount of blood on the comforter. He also testified that Jonathan Majors showed him his phone and all of the text messages, presumably the ones that came in from Grace Jabbari. So while questioning Officer Hanson about the video footage, Hanson is asked about a moment in the video where it appears that he and Officer Swain are indicating to each other with, some type of neck motion. And Hanson says that this was to get him to ask Jabbari more questions. So Hanson goes over to talk with Jabbari and the other officers that are standing in the closet, and Jabbari says, quote, that she was struck in the head several times and that the defendant had grabbed her by the throat. So this is what Jabbari's telling the group of officers standing with her there in the closet. The ADA asks, what, if any, injuries did you observe on the defendant? And Sergeant Hanson says, I didn't observe any injuries on the defendant. Hanson also accompanied Jabbari to the hospital, and there's some body cam footage throughout this time with her. Notably, it shows her using her right hand to text, and she also digs in her purse with her hand and adjusts some of her clothing. So then we get to cross-examination. It's Seth Zuckerman doing the questioning, and we get to questions about his observations. So, did you photograph the comforter? No. Did you preserve the comforter? No. And we get two final questions here that you're going to see mirror the ending of cross on the previous officer witness. Did you observe blood elsewhere in the apartment? No. Did you see vomit in the apartment? Nope. So remember, Chaudhry had just asked the same to close out cross with Officer Lucero, and now Zuckerman's doing the same to close out cross with Sergeant Hanson. The next witness up is Totty, and that's a name you may have heard me talk about because he is mentioned in the motion to dismiss, or the letter to the defense, or both. And Priya noted that he was the friend that said he spent time in the psychiatric ward at Bellevue Hospital with Grace Jabbari in his interview with the prosecution. And also that Totty had returned to the penthouse with Grace Jabbari and had been advising her, probably shouldn't be here and we should go somewhere else. You should get out of here, whatever. Priya Chaudhry, those things she laid out, it was honest again. So Totty takes the stand for direct examination with the prosecution. So Totty is Grace Jabbari's talent manager. He's the founder of Box Artist Management. He's been living in New York City for 8 years and has been Jabbari's friend for about that long and her personal friend for half of that time, so about 4 years. And he's also a friend of Holly Blakely. Danny gives us the characterization that, his yeses and nos come with a lot of explanations, and that he comes off as pretty dramatic in his descriptions. And even so, he was allowed to continue these long-winded responses, even though the defense was objecting. So where he comes into play on the night of March 25th is he starts getting various phone calls from Holly, which is another client of his. After one of the calls, he went to the hospital for Jabbari. He sits with Jabbari for about 3 hours in Bellevue Psychiatric Ward. Some of that time was waiting in the lobby, and the defense asks him to explain what Grace's demeanor was like while they were waiting in the lobby together. So he says it was fluctuating from being exhausted to concerned to frustrated. Totty testifies that at this point, Grace had already been questioned about what happened. He's asked to describe Grace again, and he describes her as basically half the person I've seen before, with a much smaller personality. He describes her as visibly emotional, that she was upset, devastated, and prosecutors ask if Grace showed him her injuries. So Totty testifies that Grace showed him the area behind her ear and the bruised finger, and regarding the ear, he says, Grace wasn't really that verbal at the time, but she showed me the injury behind her ear, which looked like it had been glued. Eventually, they leave the hospital and then they go get food. And during this time, Totty notes that they were trying to figure out how to go back to the apartment, and somebody, it's not clear to me if it was Totty or Grace, contacted Priya S. to coordinate the right time to go back to the penthouse. And remember, if we look at those text messages that Grace Jabbari sent Jonathan Majors on March 25th, the timestamp for the first block of text is 6 p.m., and in that block of text, she does say, I only just got out of the hospital. Now, we don't know how much of a figure of speech that is, or if it's very precise, and she sent it as she's walking out of the hospital. But, just some general context there. The prosecutor asked Totty to describe Grace's demeanor again at this time. He answers that she seemed exhausted. She was starting to get really tired, actually. She was shaken. They were trying to figure out the best time to go back to the apartment and pack up still, and when they heard from Priya S., they finally headed over that way. Totty notes that he tried to persuade Grace to go to a hotel or speak to her sister, but she refused to go and that she just wanted to sleep. And then if we switch over to cross-examination. So Totty admits that he didn't know if Grace ever left the apartment as he suggested. He didn't stay there that long, just a couple hours. Now, if we look back at this text message, at 9:32 p.m., they just called again to check on me, and I reiterated how this was not an attack and they do not have my blessing on any charges being placed. I read the paper they gave me about strangulation, and I said point blank this did not occur and should be removed immediately. But we just heard testimony today. Now, I was going to save my thoughts on that part for later, but we just heard testimony that she prepared page 2 of that paper. We also heard testimony for day 7, which was Thursday of last week, that Grace Jabbari, while she was still on the stand during cross-examination, had to verify that her signature was on 2 different statements to verify that she said everything. So one of those statements was something that she worked with someone at Bellevue, one of the officers to prepare at Bellevue, and she confirmed her signature on it on Thursday. And today we have the officer confirming he wrote page 1, she wrote page 2. That's what was signed. And here in this text message, and if you haven't watched my text and inconsistency video regarding the September text messages from 2022, this is what I'm talking about. We have things like I told them it was my fault for trying to grab your phone, but then we know she actually did try to grab the phone, and she's testified to that. It's not just that we're speculating that. It's not just that we're guessing that. It's not just that we're using logic or common sense or some type of deductive reasoning to get to that. She testified to it. So we have here, I told them it was my fault for trying to grab your phone. And we were told back in March or April that this is some type of Stockholm syndrome, that this is typical behavior of someone that is in an abusive relationship. But then we find out that she told them the truth, not a cover-up. And then down here we see her writing this whole paragraph. Right after she says, I love you, and doesn't get a response, she writes an entire paragraph explaining stuff that we now know is not true. I know you have the best team and there's nothing to worry about. I just want you to know that I'm doing all I can on my end. I also said to tell the judge to know that the origin of the call was to do with me collapsing and passing out, and your worry as my partner due to our communication prior. Because of that, it's cut off in this image, but that just wanted to let you know what happened. There's no note. Out of care. She promised all will be relayed. But now we know, and Jonathan knows, that that's not what happened on the body cam footage. She didn't tell him she collapsed and passed out, and it doesn't make sense that she tried to testify that she didn't tell the police officers something and decided to use them as an opportunity to get out of their relationship, that she wouldn't go to the hospital then after he's been arrested and continue telling them the truth if she allegedly was abused, that she would not tell them then what exactly he did to her. And yet here at 9:32 p.m. on March 25th, we have her iterating to Jonathan Majors, and this is the only place we have her iterating this after she's been to the hospital. This is the only place we can go and look at this. She's saying that she told them she collapsed and passed out, and we know that's not true. And she's only sending this paragraph after an unanswered, I love you, just call me when you're out. So if we think back to Ben Totty's testimony, and he says he doesn't know if Grace ever left that apartment as he suggested, she's hanging out of there waiting, just call me when you're out. So that's why if you saw my text inconsistency video that focused in on the September 2022 texts, that's why I said if you think of all the context that's missing from that, and you look at Grace's words, knowing that what's being said here isn't true and it's things that she's only saying to Jonathan Majors, versus what we know she told everybody else, and then when she tried to tell the court, she did or didn't tell somebody because of one reason or another. It's all inconsistent. And I didn't approach this case with that perception. I didn't. But I'm there. And to me, it just seems like, she told Holly she was going to pack before she passed out in the closet. Then when she's with Ben Totty after being at the hospital, she says that she's going back to the penthouse to pack, but she's really just waiting for that text message response from Jonathan Majors. That's how it appears to me. That's where I'm at with it. Anyway, so the defense closes up cross with Ben Totty by asking him 3 questions, one of which is that, did the DA help you with anything? And he admits that his flight to come back to New York was paid for. So just assuming he might have been traveling for work, and they paid for him to come testify on this day. And Josh went and found a LinkedIn picture of Ben Totty showing that, founder box artist management. And he also tags, and I'm interested in the way that he's tagging this because, we've all been kind of saying that a DV expert was going to testify, but I'm wondering if they have to title her a certain way or this is just her official title. But it says trauma therapist, Josie Torielli. And it's possible just the way she titles herself because we do just see here trauma therapist. But maybe she's not allowed to say she's an expert in DV. Who knows? There were a lot of things that were discussed, like she can't go on and talk about battered women syndrome, and she can't be up there giving any type of clinical diagnoses of, Grace Jabbari or Jonathan Majors. And then the court broke for lunch at about 12:50 and was supposed to come back at 2:15, but it seems like they didn't get started till 3:04, and I'm guessing that's because they were doing some prep for the trauma specialist expert witness that is going to be called for the afternoon. So Josh Russell says at 3:04 that trial resumes and the prosecutors have called Josie Torielli. By 4:19, the next update we see is on cross-examination. So it appears that direct examination could have lasted about an hour. And this is the first expert witness testimony that we've had in this trial. And an expert witness doesn't necessarily have firsthand knowledge of the underlying facts of the case, but they're there to help explain something that could help the jurors understand what they're looking at in the case. So often with expert witnesses, there's a longer part in the beginning where they qualify, where they do some voir dire on the expert witness. So that way the calling party, in this case it's the prosecution, can establish that this expert witness can be qualified and should be qualified as an expert in the range of subjects that they'll be asked about for the case of this trial. So some of that hour block was probably that process, that line of questioning. And the defense can move to disqualify them as an expert witness. And so we have an update from Danny on Josie Torielli's testimony so far. So we've got graduated Columbia University in 2006 with a master's in social work, licensed clinical social worker, consults in DV trauma sexual violence, and has a specialization in interpersonal trauma, DV sexual violence, and intimate partner violence. She's being paid $200 an hour by the DA, but guys, that's not really that unusual. That sounds pretty average to me. I know that sounds like sticker shock. Thanks, Ryan. Danny describes it as lackluster and feels like a Psychology 101 lecture. That even one juror fell asleep. Most of her testimony was psychobabble, and the majority of Americans now learn on TikTok. So then Torielli claims that physical violence is not always hitting someone, but then used choking as the only example of an alternative. So that's true. There's more types of, physical violence than just a closed fist punch or whatever, but, I think it's interesting that the example was something that's a highly contentious point of the charges, the initial charges in this case, and now a testimony that we heard earlier today. Danny says nothing she offered as an expert opinion applied to the case at hand, as she's only allowed to speak in very general terms. That's probably why the jurors are bored, right? Because there's no new information about Jonathan Majors, Grace Jabbari, any of the people. It's all general. There's nothing interesting or you know how they keep joking that the judge seems to want the tea. He wants to hear the tea. I mean, there's not much tea when someone's speaking generally. However, on Cross, got snarky and Zuckerberg shook things up and woke us up as an added bonus by getting her to concede the following: that she's only testified in 3 defense cases and only one of them was criminal, where she did not testify. So to me, that sounds like she was disqualified as an expert witness in that only other criminal case she was hired for. She's never worked with someone traumatized by false allegations. So that's interesting because the defense is alluding to that in their theory of the case, that this is involving false allegations from a partner that didn't want to accept a breakup. So to have an expert witness that doesn't know how to approach that and maybe offer some expertise on how someone would or would not characteristically behave if that was the case, this witness can't really rebut that characterization from the defense directly. Torielli says she supposedly just learned about Jonathan Majors last night, despite being contacted months ago by the DA. And Danny notes that the jury foreperson seems to like the Z-Man. I'm assuming that's Zuckerberg. Zuckerman seems to think he's funny. But we get that there's no way to tell by looking at someone if they've experienced trauma, and that is true. I think, saying that out loud, even if you don't have any expertise, you can kind of agree, just logic. She's never worked with someone who's faked trauma, denied being biased, but claims she has a different worldview about DV due to her profession, and that not every disagreement or argument is intimate partner violence, and that's agreeable. And then court adjourns. Thanks again to Danny for that recap on Josie Torielli. But other than that, I want to talk about, just some thoughts and analysis on what happened in day 10 so far. So if you've got thoughts, drop them below. Tons of people are participating in the comments and sparking ideas and conversations, and that's really great. So the thoughts I share, I'm just sharing them out loud here because I'm already on video. But for me, I think it's big that the police were aware of Grace's text messages. We have testimony from Sergeant Hanson that Jonathan Majors showed him all the texts in the phone, and presumably that includes that final, there's no note, just letting you know what happened text message. The next thing I think is interesting is with Sergeant Henson specifically is, you see this spot of blood on the bed, but you don't see any vomit. And you note that you see blood on the bed where someone would be laying, but that could also be where someone vomited. And that's especially interesting because to me, Jabbari has been confused about this ear injury when she realized it, where she realized it. And, I do want to ask, is someone trying to match someone else's mention of blood and a bloody ear and trying to match what they heard someone say somewhere else? My brain wants to make sense of that confusion and inconsistency and gap in knowledge, but not exactly sure how. The third thing I think is interesting is that neither of the officers asked Grace Jabbari if she had fallen, even though she's laying on the ground in the body cam footage in the closet, and she lays down there for quite a bit while they ask her questions and speak with her. This is important because the charges against Majors include that there was a cut behind the ear, which, if someone caught their ear while falling, or if they went down like this, or that if they fell and while they landed, they like skidded and pulled their ear in a certain way that it, tore the skin between the back of the ear and the rest of the head. All of that's important context, and we have no way of knowing. And then fourth is really just these text messages. So these are the text messages again that Grace Jabbari sent to Jonathan Majors, and it's just interesting to see in the context of knowing how the report was filled out. She filled out the second page at the hospital and signed off on it, and then we see her texting Jonathan Majors that, she told him that she collapsed and passed out. And then also what we heard from Ben Totty about going to the apartment to pack. We know that she told Holly before she went to the hospital that she set out to pack. She tells Ben Totty that she wanted to pack. But in this text message, it seems like she's replying because she was still waiting for a response. Just call me when you get out. And we saw no indication of her packing before she fell asleep or passed out or was laying down in the closet, except for some mention of, I think he just tripped over a suitcase. Which, if you want to go look at the last segment of my day 9 trial recap, I tried to work through 4 different possibilities for that suitcase story and the timeline of the events where she's laying in the closet and texting her friend Holly to try to make sense of it. And the best I can come up with is that it's inconsistent on Grace Jabbari's part, but you might come up with a different explanation or think differently. So that's what I've got for trial day 10. Hope this was a helpful recap and easy to follow, and I'll talk to you next time. You guys take care.